and welcome back to King's Corner, Economics Edition. I'm your host, Bella King, and today we are talking all about market structures. There are four main market structures that we will focus on today. Number one is perfectly competitive. Number two, monopoly. Number three, monopolistic. And number four, oligopoly. We're going to cover all of these market structures, tell you examples, and even show you the ways that we encounter these market structures every single day without even knowing it. To start off today, we are going to start off with perfectly competitive market. In a perfectly competitive market, these two farmers are considered price takers. This is because in a perfectly competitive market, they actually are able to take the market price. They no longer can set their own prices because if they set their prices higher than the market price, no customers are going to come. That is because nothing is stopping Farmer Y's customers from going to Farmer X if Farmer Y's prices become too high. And these farmers do not want to produce below the market price because then they're not able to make an adequate profit and continue to produce. This market price can actually be found across Mr. DARP. In a perfectly competitive market, Mr. DARP is your best friend. This is where MR, marginal revenue, equals D, demand, equals AR, which is average revenue, which equals P, which is price. This means Mr. DARP. Mr. DARP finds the market price and these farmers follow what Mr. DARP says. The second market structure that we will be talking about today is a monopoly. A monopoly occurs when one seller dominates an entire industry. Because there is no competition, these monopolies are now the price makers. They're able to set the price wherever they want. This makes a monopoly. But there's not just one type of monopoly. There is actually multiple subcategories within a monopoly that we will be talking about today. The first subcategory of a monopoly is a simple monopoly. A simple monopoly occurs whenever there is one price across the board for one specific item, no matter who the buyer is. Opposed to this is a discriminating monopoly. A discriminating monopoly actually changes the prices depending on the buyer. For example, airlines often do this. They discriminate what price they're going to have you pay based on who you are, where you're going, and what time of the year the ticket prices are. A ticket price around Christmas time might be higher than if you were to go on an average weekday in October. This is because now the monopoly is discriminating whether they're going to sell their ticket prices for more or less. This is whenever the demand is higher. When demand is higher, prices are higher. When demand is lower, prices are lower. This happens in a discriminating monopoly. More subcategories for monopolies include pure monopoly and imperfect monopoly. A pure monopoly occurs whenever there are zero substitutes for a specific product being sold by the monopoly. For example, electric companies are oftentimes considered a pure monopoly because there is nothing that is able to compete with the electric company. There is usually only one in each town and the barriers of entry are extremely high, as opposed to an imperfect monopoly. An imperfect monopoly only happens whenever there are very few substitutes. The next subcategory is a natural monopoly. Natural monopolies occur whenever things happen, well, you guessed it, naturally. When monopolies land in someone's lap because they have a surplus of a natural item. For example, diamonds are a natural monopoly. You can't just go find diamonds on the street because they are sold by one company that is the monopoly for those diamonds. And these diamonds, while they come from the earth, are owned by a monopoly. This makes them a natural monopoly. The next subcategory for monopolies is a legal monopoly. A legal monopoly often happens after a lawsuit or a law made by the government so that to keep people from competing with the certain monopoly. For example, the USPS or the US Postal Service is a legal monopoly because they dominate all trade goods in the United States. We are not able to make our own company that will trade or deliver packages to your front door because we legally cannot. We are legally bound to use the USPS in the United States. This makes this a legal monopoly. The third market structure that we're going to be talking about today is a monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competitions occur whenever companies or firms sell similar products that are not perfect substitutes. For example, Coke and Pepsi are monopolistic because they both sell cola or soda or pop or whatever you want to call it, and it happens to be a very similar product, but they are not perfect substitutes. I'd be willing to guess that any of you have a preference Coke or Pepsi, because you would say that they are not perfect substitutes. This makes them monopolistic. This monopolistic competition has a low barrier of entry. Though there are some barriers of entry, including brand loyalty, etc., there is not very many things that keep other brands from entering into the competition other than the pre-existing brands will take down any smaller firms that try to enter. The fourth and final market structure that we will be covering today is an oligopoly. Oligopolies occur whenever there is a small number of sellers in a certain market. For example, any cell phone service provider is a part of an oligopoly because there's very few cell phone service providers and high barriers of entry because there's already pre-existing cell phone service providers. You all have a cell phone service provider and the barriers of entry are high because it actually costs you more money to switch service providers to a smaller company, and these smaller firms cannot compete with AT&T, T-Mobile, etc. Overall, every market has a market structure. Some markets might even have multiple market structures. But today we have covered 4 market structures that hopefully will help you identify which market you are talking about in everyday life. This has been King's Corner Economics Edition with Bella King, all about market structures.